was 21 years old.
Okay, so why don't you set the scene with 1939, and we're all set right now.
Okay. Well, one of the main years that I remember in my lifetime was 1939. And someday, some historian will just take 1939 and start with January the 1st and go through, because it was the most interesting year. It was a year when we were still an innocent country. And by 1940, we grew up a great deal. And in 1939, I graduated from Penn State just in June of 1938, and I had just turned 20. So in 39, I was 21 years old, and living in Staten Island, and I had an opportunity to work at the World's Fair that was started in March of 39. And it was a fascinating time because the World's Fair was a very happy time, and it was the most beautiful exhibits of the main countries of the world, France and England and Russia. All had big exhibits and big buildings, and it was the year of the Trilon and the Paris Fair. And I had the opportunity to work for the H.J. Heinz Company, and I was known as the Heinz Pickle Girl. We gave away little pickle pins and also free food, little crackers with peanut butter and maybe cream of spinach soup. And so it was the only free food at the World's Fair, so most everybody stopped in at the Heinz exhibit sometime or other. And I happened to re-meet him at the World's Fair, and he later became my husband. He was working at the Westinghouse exhibit. But it was a wonderful year and a happy year. The King and Queen of England came over, visited the fair. Of course, in those days, they didn't fly. You had to come by ship. And they came right by our exhibit. We girls stood in line at a corner. And I was right at the corner. I could have reached in the limo and touched the Queen, because she was sitting on my side. And she had a pink cheeks and happy smile. And the reason that they came over, I didn't think about as much then because I was young, and that they came over to see President Roosevelt to ask for help for Lend-Lease and to help England that was then at war. We were not at war. And if you want me, that sets the scene for 1940. After the World's Fair, I stayed there until I guess it was the fall of 1939. And by that time, Rudy and I had fallen in love, and he went back to Pittsburgh to work for Westinghouse at Pittsburgh. And I went, started a job after the World's Fair. I worked at Madison Avenue. I'm ahead of myself. I worked at James McCreary Company. I had hoped to work on Madison Avenue. That was my field, advertising and journalism. But it was very hard for a woman to get a job in 1939 in advertising. So I was told at J. Walter Thompson, which was the big agency at the time, that there was no place for a woman in advertising, but I could join the stenographic pool. And after spending 4 years at Penn State, hoping to end up on Madison Avenue, I was disappointed. But they said, so I thought, well, maybe if I got some selling experience and bide my time, eventually I'd get into Madison Avenue. So I worked at James McCreary, which was a large department store across the street from the Empire State Building on the corner of 34th Street and 5th Avenue. And while I was there, I met a very young, another nice young girl, and she had never been to Staten Island. That's where I was living with my aunt and uncle. So I invited her to come over on the ferry boat, since she had never been on a ferry boat, to come to Staten Island and spend the night with me, and then go back to work the next morning. So she did that. And my aunt and uncle had a maid at the time, and her name was Taya Jackal, and she was German and a wonderful cook. And she used to set if I was coming home late from work, she would set my dinner over hot water and save my supper and then serve me when I came home. So that night when I came home with my friend, I just can't remember her first name, but her last name I think was Leibowitz. And so I introduced her to Taya when I came home, because she was going to serve us, and she did, and she served us very grumpily, and she put the dinner down on the table in a way that not her usual fashion. So we went to bed that night, and the next morning we went off to work. And then I came home that night alone, and I said to Taya, and later in the evening, Taya, didn't you feel well last night? What was the matter? I said, you didn't seem very happy or well. She said, I don't serve Jewish people. So she evidently caught the name Leibowitz and my friend, and that set the scene for a very disruptive argument that she and I had about the state of the war, and that and what was going on in overseas, because up to this time, the United States, most of the people were very isolationist. And although we knew what was going on, we didn't know the depths of it. And the fact that here I was talking to somebody that was in our house that felt that way, it brought the whole thing, after the World's Fair, the beauty of it, and the fact that England was at war with Germany, and they had already progressed in Poland, the whole thing sort of opened up, and like a bad book. And so she and I had an argument that ended this way: Miss Doris, you are going to see the Nazi flag flying over New York City. Well, then by the next day she was gone, and she left, went back to Germany, and she turned out that she had been a Nazi agent. There she was, and she loved my brother, who then, by this time my brother was in the service, and he was part of, let's see, in that part of 1939, he was down at Fort Benning, Georgia, and he was part of the First Army, called the Big Red One, under General Omar Bradley, and he was at Fort Benning, and he was being sent there. He was to be an officer. It was an officer's training, but before he finished, he was in the spring of 1940, he was taken out of the school, and he had a leave of absence, and came to see me, and I have a picture of that, and it was most probably April-May of 1942. How I jumped from, but I've just jumped from 39 and 40. I'm ahead of myself. Mm-hmm. So in 1940, after 39, and I quit work at McCreary's. I worked there until after Christmas. So I'm not sure what part of the year it was that Taya left, but it had to be 39. And in 1940, I married Rudy in June. And by that time, Kenneth was in the service. He had gone to Penn State also, and I think at the end of the first year, he enlisted. And so anyhow, he comes home in 1941. He's in the service, and he comes home in 1942 to visit me. By that time, I had one child, Lois Jane, and she was born in June of 1942. And I have a picture of Kenneth and she when he came to visit me that spring. So by the coat that she wore, it was her Easter outfit. It had to be April or May of 42 that he came to visit. We didn't know that he would then be on his way to Europe to be in D-Day and to be in. It ended up that he had just maybe a month or so of training. He remained a corporal, he never did become an officer. And he was in D-Day in the terrible Battle of Omaha Beach. And he said that the water was bloody and that some of the boys drowned before they ever got on to the beach because their equipment was so heavy. And some of the boats got closer to the beach than others, and it was like a lot of confusion and mayhem. And I asked him, I said, well now, what on the way over, when you knew that it was going to be the big battle, you didn't quite know where you were going to be landing, which he didn't know, but what did you do? And he said everyone was very quiet, and he said he thinks he's quite sure we were all praying, and that when he landed, it makes me very emotional. When he landed, his officer, lieutenant, was his officer, and a friend of his, and his head was shot off and rolled like a basketball on the beach. And somehow Kenneth got across the beach and climbed the wall and made it. It was a bloodbath, and so many of the boys didn't make it. And then we didn't hear from him until they evidently made their way through France, and we didn't have a letter from him or anything. It was until the first one, he obviously was in Germany, because by what he wrote, he had, as a boy, had always wanted a German boxer dog, a big dog, because we had a little dog, and he always wanted a big dog, and German boxers were popular at that time. He wanted a boxer. But in the first letter that we had from him, it said, "Do you remember the kind of dog that I wanted that I always wanted? Well, I never want one of those anymore." So then we knew that he was in Germany by what he told us about the dog. And nobody heard from the boys before they left England, because nobody was supposed to know where the boys were. We knew very little. The only thing that we knew was that boys had landed on June the 6th, 1942, just by news over the radio. There was no television, no movies of it until later. And so you just surmise of what was happening from the descriptions of what was happening. And it showed the boys, we had movies every Saturday. Well, the movies had something like called Pathé News, and it would be pictures of, but they didn't have, we never saw pictures of the landing at D-Day for a good long time afterwards. And so from then on we just had intermittent mail called V-mail. I don't have a picture of one, but that was, and then we had very few letters, and finally I sent cake and different things over, and everything was returned, said missing in action. So we didn't know where Kenneth was. And then we heard about the big battle of the Bulge, and there were other battles, but we knew that the boys had gone through France and that was successful. But we didn't hear until later, after the battles. It wasn't an ongoing knowledge of what was going on in the war the way it would be today with television. And so when we didn't hear from him and we got things back missing in action, then finally my mother his wallet was returned, and it was assumed that he was dead in action, because they came back from an army warehouse in St. Louis where they sent the things from the boys that were killed in action, their clothing and things. That's how the families got things back from the boys. And so we didn't know where he was or what had happened to him. So I somehow, through I guess it was the Red Cross, I found out the name of his chaplain of his company, and he was stationed in Aachen, Aachen, I think it was Aachen, Germany, and it was on the west coast of Germany, the west side of Germany, near Holland, and that's where the action was. And that chaplain wrote back to me saying that if his dog tag had never been returned to my mother, that there was some hope that he might turn up as a prisoner of war. And that is what happened. He turned up. We heard from the Red Cross that he was a prisoner of war in the eastern part of Germany, in Stalag 3C, which was on the Frankfurt River, in the town of Frankfurt on the Oder River, O-D-E-R, because there were two Frankfurts in Germany, the big one that we know of commercially, and now the little one of Frankfurt on the Oder. And that's where he spent the rest of the days of the war. And he had been taken prisoner of war, not at the Battle of Bulge, but there was another battle that was even worse than the Battle of the Bulge, when most of the boys were lost. And I don't recall the name of the battle. It was some forest. And I have to stop for a minute.
Yeah.
And the battle was and Kenneth said that he was at this battle. After it was over, everything was quiet, and he was in a ditch. He knew by the battle that most of the boys were lost. And somebody kicked him, and he said he put up his hands and said this way, and evidently said, "Comrade," and when he looked up, it was, and he thought it was maybe an American soldier, but it was a German soldier in full regalia, and this German soldier said, "It's okay, buddy," in perfect English. And he said, he looked up and saw that, and this German soldier said to him, had his gun aimed at Kenneth, and said, Kenneth, he just said, I should shoot you. He said, but I'm going to take you prisoner. And he took Kenneth prisoner, and he evidently lived not too far from where the battle was, behind the lines. And whether he was, what job he had, I don't know. But the interesting thing is that he put Kenneth, he had a motorcycle with a little seat on the side. He put Kenneth in the seat, and he told Kenneth that he'd take him prisoner. He'd take him behind the lines into where he lived, and he put him in his barn overnight. And his wife brought out a supper for Kenneth, and he told on the way when Kenneth was next to him on the motorcycle, Kenneth could see that the battle was. The battle was lost, and there were all bodies around. And he told Kenneth that he had gone, whether he was an exchange student or how, I don't know the story, but he had gone to the University of Ohio, and that's how he knew English. Whether he had, and that's all I know about that part of the story. But what an interesting, unbelievable miracle that's what saved Kenneth's life and why he became a prisoner of war. So after that night, Kenneth said the wife baked him bread and brought him bread, and Kenneth put it in his shirt sleeves. And then that morning, this German soldier, I don't know whether he was an officer or what, took him, and he had to be turned in and as prisoner of war, and he ended up in a boxcar that evidently had to go from the eastern part of Germany all the way over across Germany to the western part. And Kenneth said that bread that he had in his sleeve, he shared with the other men in the boxcar, and it evidently is what they ate. So somehow he was saved by a German soldier. It is a miracle. Along the line somewhere, this soldier said to him, I don't want to be here and you don't want to be here, but that's sort of the way it is. And that's the way it was. And so Kenneth was at Stalag 3C, and when he told the story, when he came home, I'll tell the story of how he happened to tell the story.
Okay, I'm going to pause you right there.
To go back and tell the kind of boy that Kenneth was.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Matthew's got lots of questions.
But I don't know how to put that in, I'm sort of... I can stop at the prison camp and go back and tell the story of what Kenneth was like, or should I wait? How do we do, Matthew, what would be best?
I think you should ask some questions, more specific questions.
I can go on.
You should ask some questions, be very specific, I think, about the word yourself. Think about this, because...
The background of Kenneth, and because I got a little mixed up,
you're laying all the groundwork, so that's really good. I'm just thinking, I think, maybe ask specific questions about, since you're up to the POW time, like the...
I have the shakes.
You had to switch it out, right? Was it 22 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're ready.
But
I don't know.
I think you should focus on the prisoner of war.
I can say, how about this, Matthew, if I say, before I describe what Kenneth's homecoming and how he told us the story, I would like to say a little something about my brother as a boy growing up and the type of person he was before he went enlisted, because he enlisted, he wasn't drafted, before he enlisted to do his part with the greatest, and what is known as the greatest generation, make himself change to be.
Did you get enough water, Doris? Do you want some more? Did you get enough water? You want some more water?
Yeah, I don't know where it went.
Right here.
Oh, yeah,
I'm gonna give you some
thanks.
water. So, I think you should ask them. Are you gonna be interviewing? Like, you're gonna have questions on it also?
I don't want to drink too much
No, that's right.
because I don't want to.
Do you know what I'm saying?
What?
Are you gonna be asking questions on the tape?
I don't want to wipe my nose.
Not really.
'Cause I think you should.
But it's good I have this to finger. I have something to sort of finger, you know. It makes me very nervous.
Don't be. You're doing it. No,
That's,
it's emotional.
I don't talk about it very often because, just like Kenneth, it's such an emotional thing that families, it's hard for them.
Well, you want to talk about the when you get back to prisoner of war, about how there was that German guard that gave him the candy on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, see,
that's a good story.
Because
okay.
I want to,
Yeah,
I want to talk about, because he talked about there were French boys in that camp.
Yeah.
And how when he got to the camp, they had been taken prisoner before. And I don't know whether I ever told you this part of it.
That should be.
But he said the French boys that were there were so clever that they had made a shortwave that they kept under the boards at the prison camp, out of little scraps of this and that, out of like tin foil or whatever they got from Red Cross packages, not the Americans, but it was the French boys, he said, that were so smart that had done that. And because Canada was taken later, so they had to be taken, you know, as you think about the geography, as they went from the cliffs, you know, at Omaha Beach, and then they go north. It's not too far where they get to the French border. Or was that was France. Wait a minute, they're in France. So already those boys are in the camp. And so they were there before the Americans were there. And they were the ones that had the short wave, Kenneth said. And they kept it under the boards. And somewhere along the line, in later years, when they had the what was that series that went on for so many years that was so wonderful about prisoner of wars that Alda was in?
Oh, MASH. MASH.
And it talked about that. So I don't know whether it was based on the story of that or whether it had been done in other camps too. I don't know. But I thought that's interesting, and I don't think I ever mentioned that before, but it came to mind. And I want to tell, yes. Yeah. Because Kenny got in sort of towards the end of the war, not at the beginning.
Okay, your hair's coming.
Yeah, see, I should put some hairspray on there tomorrow to get those.
Is that good, Matthew?
Yeah.
Get those back.
Well, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll
okay. There, look at, okay, that's good. There's that one piece. That one piece keeps coming.
Just push it around. That's where you
Actually,
are.
I got a little hairspray. I'm gonna put a little hairspray on. So Matthew, what are you at now? What are you gonna do?
And if you're gonna do hairspray, I gotta watch my glasses.
Yeah, I'm just gonna do a little bit. Just this.
And then push it around, yeah.
Okay. There, I think that's better. Is that better, Matthew?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Matthew, yeah, maybe you should do what Doris said, go back and talk about
So let's see,
the boy.
so what was I gonna do? How am I gonna,
Yeah, what, like, you could talk about what your brother was like before the war.
okay.
Yeah.
I can say, before you tell me when it's gonna roll.
Oh, you're good to go.
Okay.
You're good.
So before I tell the story as I remember it, and the way my brother told me about his life in the prison camp, I'd like to tell you, to set the scene a little bit, and tell you about the type of boy that my brother was. He was 4 years younger than I. He was born in May of 1922. So when he enlisted, he was not drafted, he enlisted. He was like, I guess it was the end of his freshman year at Penn State. And I guess he was 18, he had just turned 19 because his birthday was in May. And he enlisted with a group of other boys. His cousin went into Merchant Marine, someone into Marines and fraternity brothers. He was a member of Phi Delta Theta, and most of those boys enlisted in something to help the cause along, because they really were fighting for something, and that was for the freedom of Europe. Because if Europe would go down the drain, we would also. So, but as my brother was a very gentle boy, and he had a visual problem as a baby and a child. He had what is known as a concomitant squint that was corrected through surgery, so he always wore glasses. So but my father died when he was 7 years old, and then he enjoyed going to a boys' camp in the summertime, and he became a great marksman. He always got the medal as the best marksman at camp, and later became a counselor at the camp. And but his shooting was never. It was always just as a sport. Never the thought of ever using it in war. So it must have been very difficult for him to change his love of marksmanship to have to turn it into what it became, because it was not his makeup at all. In fact, after my father died, we went to live with my aunt and uncle, my mother, my brother, and I, because they had no children and had a very large, beautiful house on a hill in Staten Island. And in fact, that's why we had the German maid, because she turned out to be an agent, because from this hill she could see everything that was going on in the New York harbor. So, and she liked my brother, and she used to help him with his homework. And so